A barefoot woman in a white gown stands at the edge of a cornfield, waving at passing cars in the dead of night. Her face is pale, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the headlights. Stories like this aren't just urban legends. They're drawn from real accounts that turn late-night drives into something far more unsettling. Tonight, we're exploring 10 encounters that transformed ordinary roads into stages for the unexplained. Ghostly hitchhikers, phantom patrol cars, and things that vanish without a trace. These stories blur the line between reality and nightmare. If you crave true stories that leave you questioning what's out there, subscribe now. Some roads are haunted by more than memory. The first story begins on a quiet Indiana highway where the familiar turns suddenly and irreversibly strange. Mark Ellison's headlights cut through the darkness along Highway 41, the beams catching nothing but rows of corn and the occasional glint of frost on the roadside grass. The quiet was thick, broken only by the static of the radio and the hum of his engine. Then, out of the shadows, a woman appeared at the edge of the road. She stood barefoot in the cold, a white gown brushing her ankles, her hair wild and tangled. Her pale face looked past the truck, eyes fixed on the cornfield. She raised her hand, waving, not frantically, but with a slow, deliberate motion that felt like both a warning and a plea. Mark eased his truck to the shoulder, 20 yards ahead, convinced she needed help. When he looked back, she was gone. He stepped out, the chill settling in his bones as he scanned the empty highway. The only sound was the faint hiss of his idling engine, until a low whisper drifted from the corn. It wasn't clear or familiar, just a steady murmur, urgent and strange, rising and falling with the wind. Mark strained to listen, picking out the crunch of footsteps somewhere between the rows, too many to count, moving just beyond the reach of his flashlight. Anxious, he turned to get back in his truck. That's when his light swept over the ground and caught something that shouldn't have been there, a trail of small, muddy footprints leading straight from the cornfield to where he stood. His hands shook as he climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. He started the engine, heart pounding, and checked the mirror. The woman stood in the center of the highway, illuminated by his brake lights. Her hand was still raised, her eyes still fixed on the corn. Mark blinked, and she vanished. Not into the field, not into the night. Just gone, as if she'd never been there at all. Days later, Mark couldn't shake the memory. He found himself digging through an old box of local newspaper clippings at a diner off the highway, searching for some explanation. There, tucked between faded headlines, was a photograph. The woman's face stared back at him, haunted, familiar. A waitress glanced at the photo and her expression changed. "That's Sarah Miller," she said quietly. "She disappeared from a farmhouse near here in 1979. Folks say she still wanders these fields, looking for help." The muddy footprints, the whispers, the sudden vanishing, all of it tied back to Sarah Miller's story. For years, drivers on Highway 41 had reported seeing a barefoot woman in white, always near the cornfields, always waving for someone to stop. The locals didn't talk much about it, but the legend was there, woven into the landscape. Mark never drove that stretch of road at night again. Encounters like Mark's aren't as rare as you'd think. For every story that ends with a vanished ghost, there's another that leaves behind more questions than answers. And sometimes the next figure you see on a deserted road isn't reaching out for help. It's watching you, waiting for you to notice. The Arizona desert at night feels like another planet, endless, silent, and full of secrets. That's what Lisa Monroe thought as she drove down Route 60, the highway unspooling ahead of her with nothing but stars and the hum of her tires for company. Her coffee was still warm, the dashboard clock blinking past midnight, and the emptiness pressed in from every side, That's when she saw the patrol car. It was parked on the shoulder, headlights off, an old black and white cruiser straight out of the 1950s. There were no badge markings, no decals, and no license plates. A single red light sat on the dash, pulsing faintly in the dark. Lisa's foot eased off the gas. The car pulled onto the road in front of her, taillights burning a dull red. It moved with an odd, wavering pace, never quite steady, never quite predictable. She followed, uncertain as the cruiser led her down the empty highway. Then, without warning, the red light appeared in her rearview mirror. The patrol car was now behind her, signaling for her to pull over. Lisa's hands tightened on the wheel as she guided her car to the shoulder, heart thumping in her chest. The cruiser stopped sharply behind her, and an officer stepped out. A figure in a dark khaki uniform, the kind you'd expect to see in old photographs. Shoes polished, hat brim low enough to hide his face. He approached her window and spoke in a voice that was calm but heavy. "You need to turn back. Turn back before it's too late." No explanation, no badge number, just that warning. Lisa managed to promise she'd do as he said. The officer nodded once and walked away into the darkness. She adjusted her rearview mirror, expecting to see the patrol car idling behind her. Instead, the road was empty. The cruiser and the officer were gone. No taillights, no flash of red, not even the sound of an engine fading into the distance. Lisa's dashcam had been rolling the entire time. When she played it back, the audio caught her voice, strained and nervous, answering the officer's warning. But on the video, her window framed nothing but the silent desert. She was talking to empty air. At the next gas station, Lisa shared her story, hoping for a rational explanation. The clerk didn't hesitate. "You saw the ghost cop," he said, almost matter of fact. He told her about the state trooper who died on Route 60 in 1965, lost control during a high-speed pursuit, his car plunging into a ravine. Ever since, locals have whispered about a phantom patrol car that appears without warning, pulling drivers over to deliver a cryptic warning. He still pulls people over, trying to warn them about something, the clerk said. But no one knows what. Over the years, others have reported the same encounter. The same old cruiser, the same silent warning, the same sudden vanishing. Some believe the trooper is still trying to prevent another tragedy. Others think he's bound to the empty stretch of desert, caught in a loop that never ends. Either way, Lisa no longer drives Route 60 after dark. Stories like Lisa's are reminders that some roads carry more than just travelers. They hold on to their ghosts. And sometimes what you see on a lonely highway isn't just a flicker in the corner of your eye. It's a warning, or a glimpse of something that refuses to be forgotten. Not everyone believes in these stories, but those who've seen them firsthand tend to change their minds. And for some, the next encounter is even stranger. A figure on the roadside, waiting for a ride, with nothing but darkness where a face should be. Brian Carter didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. As a delivery driver, he was used to empty roads and silent nights, especially on the back roads near Chillicothe, Ohio. But even the most rational people can find themselves questioning everything when the world narrows to a fog-choked stretch of asphalt, and the only sound is the static of a radio struggling for a signal. That March night in 2024, the fog was thick. The streetlights had vanished behind him, and the darkness pressed in from every side. He spotted movement on the shoulder ahead. A figure, still and hunched, the hood of a gray sweatshirt pulled low. The hitchhiker stood alone, rainwater dripping from the hem of their jeans, shivering in the cold. Brian slowed and stopped, rolling down the window. The hitchhiker climbed in without a word, settling into the back seat, their face hidden in shadow. Brian tried to break the silence, asking where they were headed, how long they'd been out there, but the only answer was the heavy quiet. The stranger kept their head down, silent, unmoving. The air inside the truck shifted. A cold that felt unnatural crept in, numbing Brian's fingers and making his breath hang in the air despite the heater's steady hum. The radio, already weak, sputtered and died, leaving only the sound of tires on wet pavement. Brian gripped the wheel tighter, glancing at the dashboard, but the temperature gauge stayed steady. The sense of unease grew, every second stretching longer than the last. He checked the rearview mirror, hoping for some sign of reassurance, but what he saw sent a shock through his system. The hitchhiker's hood had slipped back just enough to reveal a smooth, featureless blur where a face should have been. No eyes, no mouth, no hint of a nose, just blank skin, as if every trace of identity had been wiped away. Brian's chest tightened. He looked away, then back again, hoping the fog or his own nerves were playing tricks. A strange dampness seeped from the back seat, cold, soaking through the fabric. Brian noticed it in that half-second before panic took over, the wetness spreading across the upholstery as if someone had climbed in straight from a river. Heart hammering, Brian slammed on the brake and brought the truck to a stop on the gravel shoulder. He turned, ready to demand the hitchhiker leave, but the seat was empty. No sound of a door opening, no footsteps on the gravel, just the lingering cold and the wet imprint where a passenger should have been. Shaken, Brian drove to the nearest gas station, hands trembling as he recounted the story to the attendant. The man behind the counter didn't seem surprised. "You've seen the faceless hitchhiker," he said, voice low. He told Brian about the old legend. A young man lost in a car crash in the 1980s, swept away by a flooded creek, his body never found. Since then, drivers had reported picking up a silent hitchhiker on foggy nights, always leaving behind a cold, wet seat and a memory that never quite faded. The details matched too closely: the unnatural chill, the radio static, the vanishing passenger. Some say it's just the mind trying to make sense of fear and darkness. Others believe the faceless hitchhiker is still searching for a ride he'll never finish, trapped between worlds. Brian doesn't drive those roads at night anymore, but every so often he finds himself checking the rearview mirror just to be sure he's alone. Out there on the empty highways, it's easy to convince yourself that what you saw was just a trick of the light, until the next story reminds you that some things are waiting, just beyond the edge of your headlights. Jessica Reed's routine drive home along a 35 south of Austin should have been uneventful. The highway stretched empty beneath the December sky, interrupted only by the silhouettes of overpasses that loomed ahead in the moonlight. At 3:15 a.m., her car was the only one on the road. As she approached one of those overpasses, she noticed a cluster of figures standing along the edge. Jessica leaned forward, trying to make sense of what she saw. A group of children, 5 or 6 by her count, stood motionless on the bridge. Their pale faces caught the moonlight, and their clothes looked oddly old-fashioned, like something out of a faded photograph. They raised their arms in slow, exaggerated waves, the kind that seemed both desperate and rehearsed. The sight unsettled her. No one should be out here at this hour, least of all children. Jessica's grip on the steering wheel tightened as she passed beneath the overpass. The moment her car rolled under the bridge, the figures vanished. Jessica glanced in her rearview mirror, but the overpass was empty. No sign of the children, no hint of movement. A heavy silence settled in, pressing against the windows and filling the car. The familiar background noise of the highway faded away. No crickets, no distant engines, just a complete and sudden quiet that made her skin crawl. Then, From somewhere outside the car, a faint giggle drifted through the silence. It circled her vehicle, high and bright, echoing off the concrete and the cold night air. The laughter grew, overlapping, as if several children were darting around her, unseen. Jessica struggled to steady her breathing, her mind racing for any explanation that made sense. She tried to drive away, but her car sputtered and stalled just a few yards past the overpass. The dashboard lights flickered and died, leaving her stranded in the dark. Jessica turned the key again and again, but the engine refused to respond. She sat frozen, hands clenched on the wheel, as the laughter outside grew louder and more insistent, moving in unpredictable patterns around her car. A new detail caught her attention. Small, wet handprints began to appear on the fogged windows. Each print was distinct, the size unmistakably that of a child's palm. They pressed against the glass for a moment before fading, only to reappear on another window. Jessica's heart pounded as she watched the handprints multiply, her sense of isolation deepening with every new mark. After what felt like an eternity, headlights appeared in her side mirror. A tow truck pulled up behind her, and the driver approached with a flashlight. Jessica stumbled out of the car and tried to explain what had happened, her words tumbling over each other. The driver listened, his face growing grim as she described the children, the laughter, the handprints. "You saw the ghost kids," he said quietly. He told her about the 1972 school bus crash, how a bus had gone off that very overpass, taking the lives of every child on board. Since then, stories of children waving from the bridge and leaving handprints on car windows had haunted the area. Jessica later learned that locals avoided stopping near that overpass at night. The children's slow, deliberate waves were a familiar warning to those who knew the story. Some said the spirits lingered, hoping someone would finally notice them or offer help that never came. For Jessica, the memory didn't fade. Even in daylight, she sometimes caught the echo of laughter or glimpsed a small handprint in the condensation on her window. These are the echoes of the 1972 school bus tragedy. Not every haunting leaves behind a visible mark. Sometimes it's a face glimpsed in the mirror, or a figure that seems to move closer each time you look away. Delivery shifts always stretched late for David Miller, but he never expected his routine to unravel on the quiet roads of small-town Pennsylvania. Most nights it was just him, the low hum of his old sedan, and the occasional porch light flickering past. On this particular night, though, the solitude pressed in, thick and uneasy. David was heading back to the pizza shop after a late delivery, cutting through a silent residential street. His headlights swept over empty pavement, and the soft red glow of the dashboard barely held back the dark. A flicker of movement caught his attention, a shadow shifting at the edge of his rearview mirror. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he glanced up again, a figure appeared. A man in a dark suit walked steadily down the center of the road, directly behind David's car. He wasn't running, just moving with a quiet, relentless purpose. The suit looked untouched by the night, crisp and out of place, and the man's face stayed hidden, swallowed by shadow. There was no sidewalk, no reason for anyone to be out there, especially dressed like that. David's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, a late-night wanderer maybe, but the unease only grew as he watched the man draw closer, step by step, even as the car kept moving. The figure's pace never changed. He just kept coming, always in view, never falling behind. Then came the whisper. It slipped into the car, barely louder than the engine's idle, but it cut through the silence. "Don't look back." The words pressed against David's chest, cold and certain. He fought the urge, but instinct took over and he checked the mirror again. The man was closer now, his face still obscured, his movement unnervingly smooth. A chill ran through David, sharp and immediate. He thought about pulling over, letting the figure pass, but something deep inside told him not to stop. He pressed harder on the gas, eyes fixed on the road ahead, feeling the figure's presence just behind him. The further he drove, the more the man seemed to fade, until the mirror finally showed nothing but empty blacktop. Relief washed over David as he pulled into the pizza shop's parking lot. He sat for a moment, hands still trembling, before noticing something out of place. A thin, white card resting on the passenger seat. He picked it up. Evergreen Funeral Home was printed in block letters, followed by an address he didn't recognize. The name sparked a memory. Evergreen Funeral Home had burned down in 1954, a fire that gutted the building and left only rumors and stories in its wake. The address on the card matched the location of the old ruins, a place everyone in town avoided after dark. David stared at the card, the weight of the night settling in. The funeral home was more than just a piece of local history. It was a symbol of tragedy, a landmark for every whispered ghost story in the area. People still talked about the fire, about lives lost and spirits left behind. Finding that card in his car, when he knew he'd never touched it, tied his experience to something much older and darker than a simple late-night scare. From that night on, David never trusted the rear-view mirror the same way. Every night drive, the whisper, "Don't look back," lurks in his mind. Some encounters leave behind more than memories. They leave evidence, a sign that something is still waiting in the dark, just out of sight. But sometimes, the warning doesn't come from a whisper or a shadow. It comes from someone who needs help, someone who shouldn't be there at all. Tyler Brooks didn't expect anything out of the ordinary as he wound his FedEx truck along the narrow mountain roads near Estes Park, Colorado. The late September air was sharp, the forest pressing close on both sides, and the only sounds were the steady rumble of the engine and the occasional snap of a branch under the tires. These roads were familiar, usually empty except for wildlife and the wind. But that night, just past midnight, something stood waiting in the glare of his headlights. A boy, maybe 10 years old, stood by the roadside. The red jacket he wore made him impossible to miss, a jarring splash of color in the muted dark. Tyler slowed to a stop, unsure whether to be relieved or worried to see a child this far from anywhere. He stepped out, calling softly to the boy, asking if he was lost or needed help. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the dense woods. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "He's coming." The words hung in the air, thin and urgent. Tyler saw fear in the boy's eyes, but before he could move closer, the boy was gone. No footsteps, no rustle in the brush, just empty space where he'd been standing. The silence that followed felt unnatural. Tyler scanned the tree line, every sense on edge. Then, from deep within the forest, came the sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate, slow, and far too loud to be a deer or coyote. Branches snapped under something large moving through the darkness, always just out of sight. The footsteps didn't rush. They closed the distance with patience, as if whatever was out there knew Tyler was listening. His headlights caught a glint in the dirt near the edge of the road. Tyler's attention snapped to it. A battered flashlight, its beam flickering weakly, aimed straight into the trees. He crouched to pick it up, feeling the cold, damp metal in his hand. The flashlight was old, the casing scratched and worn, its style out of place for something a child today might carry. The make matched the description of a light reported missing decades earlier, a detail that would only become clear to Tyler the next day. He didn't linger. The sense of being watched grew stronger with every second, the footsteps still moving somewhere in the dark. Tyler climbed back into his truck, the boy's warning echoing in his mind, and drove until the forest finally fell behind him. The following morning, Tyler took the flashlight to the park rangers. Their reaction was immediate. A boy in a bright red jacket had disappeared from a nearby campground in 1995, and his family had described a flashlight just like the one Tyler found. The rangers' faces tightened as they confirmed the details. The road where Tyler had stopped ran close to the old campsite, and the boy's disappearance had never been solved. Tyler's unease deepened. The memory of the boy's voice, the vanishing, and the steady approach of unseen footsteps stayed with him long after that night. What troubled him most wasn't just the encounter itself, but the knowledge that the boy's warning had come with evidence. A flashlight, unchanged after decades, left as a sign that something unresolved still lingered in those woods. He never found a way to explain what happened, and the image of that red jacket and the flickering light became a permanent shadow on his late-night routes. Some roads hold on to their tragedies, and some warnings come too late to change anything. The next time Tyler found himself alone on a mountain pass, he couldn't help but wonder what else might be waiting just beyond the reach of his headlights, or whose story might be playing out on the empty road behind him. Not every driver's fear comes from the woods. Sometimes it's the road itself, a vehicle in the mirror that refuses to follow the rules of the living. Rachel Adams didn't expect trouble on the open road. She was comfortable behind the wheel, used to the rhythm of long drives, and found a certain peace in the emptiness of Kansas highways. But on a damp September night, that peace dissolved into something more uncertain. US 50 stretched ahead, swallowed by a thick fog that blurred the line between pavement and sky. The mist pressed in close, muting the world outside her car, and her headlights seemed to vanish just a few feet ahead. There were no gas stations, no distant lights, only the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the sense that she was utterly alone. That changed the moment Rachel caught a glimpse of another vehicle through her rearview mirror. At first, it was just a faint glow, easy to dismiss as another late-night traveler. But the lights grew brighter, then sharper, until a faded blue sedan with high beams blazing pulled up tight behind her. The car's headlights flooded her cabin, making it impossible to see the road clearly. Rachel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She tried to ignore the pressure building in her chest, but the blue sedan refused to back off or pass. It hovered just a few feet from her bumper, its beams relentless, as if determined to pin her in place. Rachel slowed, signaling for the car to go around. The sedan stayed put, matching her every move. The high beams never wavered. She risked a glance in the mirror, hoping for a glimpse of the driver's face, but the lights were too bright. They erased every detail. She reached for her phone, more out of habit than hope, but the screen froze and her signal vanished. The technology she relied on offered no comfort. Even her GPS, usually a lifeline in the dark, began to glitch. The map spun. The route twisted into impossible loops, and every attempt to find her bearings led her back to the same stretch of road. The sense of being trapped grew sharper. Rachel's heart hammered as she pressed the accelerator, desperate to put distance between herself and the blue sedan. The fog thickened, swallowing sound and light alike. She checked the mirror again, bracing for the glare. But this time the road behind her was empty. The blue sedan, so close just seconds before, had vanished. There were no taillights fading into the mist, no sign of a turn or a sudden stop. The only evidence of its presence was the lingering tension in the air and Rachel's trembling hands. She pulled over, breathing hard, and waited for her nerves to settle. The silence felt deeper than before, as if the fog itself was holding its breath. After a few minutes, Rachel continued her drive, the memory of the blue sedan settling in like a weight she couldn't shake. Days later, she found herself in a small diner not far from where it happened. She shared her story with an older man at the counter. He listened without surprise, then nodded. At that diner, she learned this stretch has seen the blue sedan since the 70s wreck. The man told her about a family who lost their lives in a crash during heavy fog, their faded blue car found in a ditch off US 50. For decades, drivers have described a phantom sedan that appears out of nowhere, tailgates with blinding high beams, and then disappears without a trace, always in the fog, always on that same lonely road. Rachel left the diner with more questions than answers. The blue sedan was more than a trick of the light or a product of nerves. Its presence lingered in her thoughts, a reminder that some roads carry their own stories, ones that refuse to fade no matter how many years pass. And sometimes, the things you encounter in the dark aren't just shadows or tricks of the mind. They're echoes of something unresolved, waiting for the next traveler to notice. On nights when the fog rolls in and the world narrows to a strip of asphalt and headlights, it's easy to wonder what else might be out there. What sounds, what shapes, might break through the silence. Michael Turner had spent years navigating the back roads outside Savannah, Georgia as a rideshare driver. He trusted his GPS, even when it sent him down unfamiliar gravel lanes bordered by thick stands of pine and tangled undergrowth. But in June 2023, a midnight route took him somewhere that trust couldn't reach. The air felt heavy, the trees pressed close, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath his tires as he followed the narrow path deeper into the dark. Halfway down the road, a new sound cut through the quiet. A baby's cry, thin and desperate, drifting from the woods to his left. Michael slowed, the hair on his arms rising as the sound sharpened, piercing the night. It came in uneven bursts, sometimes muffled, sometimes clear, as if the baby was moving or being carried through the trees. His instinct screamed at him to stop and help, but reason warred with fear. There was no sign of a car, no light, nothing but dense forest and the echo of that cry. He hesitated, foot hovering over the brake, heart pounding in his chest. The headlights swept across a clearing, catching on the warped frame of a house nearly lost beneath vines and moss. The roof sagged, the porch caved in, windows black and empty. Locals knew the place, a ruin left to rot after fire swept through in the 1960s, trapping a mother and her infant inside. Stories clung to the house like the kudzu, and Michael remembered them all in a rush, as the baby's cry seemed to shift inside the crumbling walls. His pulse spiked as the crying cut off. For a moment there was only silence. Then from the trees opposite the house a faint rustling began, deliberate, uneven, as if someone or something was moving just out of sight. Michael's breath caught. He kept his car idling, hands locked on the wheel, staring at the ruined house and the shadows shifting around it. The silence pressed in, thick and absolute. He forced himself to look away, shifting the car into drive, but a flicker in the rearview mirror made him freeze. Small, pale handprints began to form on the condensation of the back window, one after another, as though tiny hands were pressing from the outside, leaving faint, wet outlines that dragged downward before fading. Michael's nerves snapped. He floored the gas, the car jolting forward, gravel spitting beneath the tires as he tore out of the woods and didn't slow until he reached the lights of a gas station miles away. When he finally stepped out to check, the rain had blurred the prints, but streaks still marked the glass, evidence that something had been there. He told his story to a few locals, and they nodded, unsurprised. They spoke of the house's tragic history, how the mother and child had never left, how drivers sometimes heard cries in the trees or saw lights flicker in the ruins. Some said the sounds were a warning. Others believed they were the lingering echoes of lives cut short. The effect of the baby's cry stayed with Michael long after that night. He knew that sound was more than just a trick of the mind. Science says we're wired to respond, to feel fear, urgency, helplessness, even if we've never held a child ourselves. That night, every instinct in him was pulled taut, and the memory refuses to let go. Now every time he hears distant cries, he remembers that night on the gravel road. The ordinary can turn strange in an instant, and every driver knows how quickly the familiar can become something you'll never forget. Some encounters leave you shaken, others make you question what's real. And sometimes it's not a single figure or a phantom sound, but a whole procession of the unexplained that appears without warning, turning the road ahead into a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Emily Foster's job kept her on the road long after most people had gone to bed. In February 2024, she found herself behind the wheel of a moving truck on Route 3 near Cairo, Illinois, at 3:30 in the morning. The fog was dense enough to erase the world outside her windshield, and her headlights barely reached past the front bumper. There was a heaviness to the air, as if the night was pressing in, and the road ahead felt endless and unfamiliar. Without warning, 3 trucks emerged from the mist. They were old, black, boxy, and identical, their shapes sharp against the gray. None of them had headlights. Only faint taillights glowed through the fog, and the trucks moved together in perfect formation, slow and deliberate. Emily's first thought was confusion. No one drove in such tight unison, especially not in vehicles that looked like relics from another time. The silence around her deepened, the only sound the low rumble of her own engine and the rhythmic crunch of tires on damp pavement. As she drew closer, Emily's unease grew. She edged into the opposite lane, hoping to catch a better look at the lead truck's driver. Through the glass, she saw a man sitting perfectly still, skin pale, eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight ahead. There was no sign of life in his face, no movement, no flicker of recognition, just a blank, haunted expression. The next truck was the same, a motionless figure behind the wheel, hands fixed to the steering wheel as if frozen in place. The third truck's driver matched the others, all 3 caught in some silent, synchronized ritual. Emily's radio suddenly exploded with static, a harsh noise that filled the cab and made her grip the wheel tighter. At the same moment, her headlights dimmed and flickered. The road seemed to close in, and the air inside the truck turned cold. She pressed the gas, heart pounding, deciding she couldn't stay behind the convoy any longer. She pulled out and accelerated, passing the first truck, then the second, and finally the third. Each time she looked into the cabs, she saw the same pale, unmoving faces, eyes fixed ahead, oblivious to her presence. As she surged ahead, she risked a glance in the mirror, half expecting to see the trucks looming behind her. Instead, the road was empty. The trucks had vanished. No taillights, no shapes in the fog. Nothing but the blank stretch of Route 3. Still shaken, Emily stopped at a service station in town and described what she'd seen to a local mechanic. His face grew serious as she recounted the details. "You're not the first to see them," he told her. "Back in '52, a convoy just like that crashed in a pileup on this road. Folks say those trucks still drive the route on foggy nights, looking for a way home." The story didn't sound like a warning meant for outsiders. It felt more like a piece of history, a scar the road refused to let heal. Emily left with the memory of those trucks burned into her mind. The mechanic's words gave her encounter a new weight, connecting what she'd seen to a tragedy that lingered in the asphalt and the air. On certain nights, when the fog rolls in and the road seems to stretch forever, it's easy to believe that the past is never as far away as it seems. Some stories don't end with answers. They leave you watching the road ahead, wondering what you'll find the next time headlights break through the dark. Tonight, you've witnessed 10 real encounters that show how quickly the roads we trust can turn strange. Each of these stories comes from drivers who found themselves face to face with the unexplained. Reminders that the line between safety and fear can vanish without warning. These aren't just tales to pass the time. They're warnings from those who know how fast the ordinary can slip away. Have you ever seen something on the highway that left you questioning what's real? Share your own ghost road stories. Maybe you've driven into the unknown. Think you're safe on a quiet road? Tell us your spine-chilling rides below.